You want to take that?
Yeah, I can probably do that.
I've been so.
Because we weren't sending those things to Peter. I know.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Good. It is very warm in here as we start peeling off layers. Oh, that's 50 people.
No, I can't see that.
Kelly, you already recorded. Good evening. I'd like to call the November 20th, 2023 meeting of the University Heights City Council to order. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. King?
Here.
Mrs. Sachs?
Here.
Mr. Cooney? Mrs. Wise?
Here.
Mr. Rock?
Here.
Ms. Marshall? Here. Ms. Weiser? Here.
Is there a motion to excuse Mr. Cooney? Motion by Mrs. Sims?
Not a motion, not a comment. Do I wait until a motion is made or do I make a comment?
I think a motion might be.
Okay, no motion.
So moved, Mayor.
Okay, motion by Mr. King. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Wise. Is there any discussion?
I have a
Mrs. Sachs.
discussion. Thank you. Later on in this meeting, we'll be talking about job descriptions, and there was something that permeates those about demonstrates regular and predictable attendance. This year to date, Mr. Cooney has attended 62% of the meetings and missed 38%. And I wish him well. I hope he's not absent because of health or emergency reasons, but I haven't heard that. I looked back at last year, and he was present 86% and missed 14%. I'm not going to make a motion not to, to excuse him because somebody can fact check that. I don't want to make that mistake. But these are just regular and special council meetings, not committee meetings. And I don't know what regular and predictable attendance is, especially when, he does join by Zoom, but he can't vote. And I think the residents depend on members of council to be present and weigh in on matters, all matters of importance. So just on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sachs. Is there any other discussion? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll on the motion to excuse.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Nay.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall? Aye. Ms. Weiser?
Very good. Motion carries. Thank you. Will you join us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next item is reading and disposal of the journal. I believe there's a set of minutes from November 6th, 2023. Is there a motion? Motion to approve by Mrs. Wise. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Marshall. Any discussion?
I had sent Ms. Thomas, Ms. Thomas a correction, a minor, very minor correction. The original of the minutes read November 16th instead of November 6th. And it was so corrected already. Bless you. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any other corrections? Seeing that, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rapp?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall? Aye. Ms. Weiser?
Aye. Very good, motion carries. Next item is additions and removals from the agenda and referrals to committee. Are there any? Mrs. Wise.
Yes, thank you. After speaking with Mrs. Drucker, I'd like to table letter E. That will be discussed in the zoning code review, and I think it will be covered more in depth there with all of that resulting in an ordinance.
Okay, we have a motion to table, and I suppose remove that from the agenda, that item.
I'll second the motion.
Second by Mr. King. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rapp?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Okay, very good. Item E is tabled, and will be taken up in the zoning discussion as referenced by the vice chair. Are there any other additions and removals from the agenda or referrals to committee? Seeing none, we will now turn to comments from the audience. Speakers may take up to 5 minutes. If you are interested in addressing the city this evening, please come up to the podium and state your name and address for the record. You may take up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Mike Meliskis, 2592 University Boulevard. Thank you for tabling an issue. I was going to talk about that today, particularly around the piece with parking requirements. I think you all know me at this point. That's something I'm pretty passionate about. And since we're going to bring it up at ZoneCo anyway, I'd like to just enter some facts into the record about parking and what the use of it is, particularly around parking minimums. So when we look into doing the rezone, I really strongly consider getting rid of those across the board. There's really quite a few reasons why they're not productive. University Heights has extremely limited developable land. So when we require parking minimums, any new development that tries to go in is designating half of their square footage almost to parking. When we're trying to bring in new economic redevelopment, trying to lower our taxes by bringing in retail or other productive parts of the city, that really hampers their ability to infill because we're requiring so much parking. We're way out of line even with the standards around the country. We require a lot more parking than is typical. And more big cities are really moving away from parking minimums entirely because they understand the cost of not having productive land in the city. Parking lots are heat islands. Cleveland is one of the hottest above ambient temperature cities in the country because of how much ground cover we have. We don't have permeable land where we can have flood water get down into the ground. Instead, it gets stuck on parking lots, on roads, and it causes our homes to flood instead of being handled naturally like it's supposed to, as well as the heat islands like I've talked about. Parking minimums increase car miles driven in our community. It makes it harder to choose any other form of transportation because we dedicate so much infrastructure to our cars. Wider roads, more parking spaces for everything but people and bikes. So people, when they're making the decision, how do I get somewhere, they go, oh, the car's easy, we'll do that. And that's really not the behavior we want to encourage. encourage for people who are able to do otherwise. Parking makes it actively harder to walk, bike, or use public transit. In particular, when we look at some of the things like Chick-fil-A, when we're trying to see how they're designing their properties, they're making pedestrians cross through their drive-through just to get to the building, as well as like 100 feet of parking in some directions where people have to dodge cars with no other way. There's no sidewalks, no other access. I saw, as I was looking through the books here today, that we have, very limited requirements on bike parking. Only in a few zonings is it called out at all. And so, we're looking for ways to reduce our carbon footprint as a city, as our commitment to Power Clean Future and some other, some organizations. One of the ways to do that would be increase bike parking, so it makes it easier for people to make that choice. No matter where you are in the city, you're only about 1.5 miles away from anywhere else in the city. So it really makes sense to bike if you're able, except that we don't have the infrastructure to support it. And finally, parking minimums disproportionately impact people of color and lower income members of our community because it forces people to have a car when it doesn't really make viable economic sense. If we have better support for other methods of transportation, we're asking people to really commit a lot to owning a car between car payments and insurance and registration fees. That could be going towards more productive uses of people's money. As well as the fact that as we're looking at zoning, we want to increase the ability to infill housing, ADUs and those sorts of things. If we attach more parking to those, we're going to exacerbate all those problems, make it more expensive for people to age in place, make it more likely to be flooding and all of those things. So I know it's not something we're taking action on tonight, but that just kind of reminded me with the parking requirements in the DEV statute that I really would like that to be something that we're thinking about as we try to move the city forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moses. Is there anybody else who would like to address the city this evening? If so, please come on up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and you may take up to 5 minutes. If there are no more, then we will move on to reports and communications from the mayor and the taking of action thereon. Music, applause, hugs, and laughter, as well as many University Heights residents filled John Carroll University's Jardine Room on the evening of Wednesday, November 15, 2023, for the 2023 University Heights Civic Awards. The event was hosted by JCU graduate and 19 News reporter Rachel Veda. Congratulations to all of the award recipients, including the entire University Heights Service Department, who were named as the City Employees of the Year. State Representative Juanita Will-Brent earned Public Servant of the Year, and Charter Review Commission members Lee Crumrine and Chris Myrick are named Volunteer of the Year and Citizen of the Year, respectively. Dr. Sally Massia took home the Educator of the Year award, and Police Lieutenant Todd Kinley was named City Co-worker of the Year for his 35 years of service. Good Neighbor Awards were presented the following: Primo's Pizza for support of local events and the creation of the Mr. Cooper Pizza. Robin Van Leer for her work on the Memorial Day Parade and Fall Fest. Chocolate Emporium for sustainability efforts. Heights High Academic Challenge Team for winning the 2023 Academic Challenge Tournament. Christoph Junko of Dollar Bank for financial support of the Juneteenth celebration and the Fall Fest. Rabbi El Molbaum for earning the Cleveland Jewish News 12 Under 36 recognition. Alexandra Fletcher of Faces of Orthodoxy for her work to dispel negative stereotypes of the Orthodox Jewish community. Dan Plato for his work on the Jesu Bulldog Bolt 5K fundraiser. Hartley Love of the Beautiful Homes Committee presented this year's awards for beautiful homes in categories including curb appeal, sit a spell, best front door, green home, and a new category this year, good stewardship, which are homeowners who have owned their home for at least 20 years. I will not list all of the recipients tonight, but I will supplement them with my report for the record. They will receive their 2024 Beautiful Home Award markers in the spring. In my opening remarks at the awards ceremony, I reflected on the pause after 2009, after 50 years of civic awards, and how as a new mayor, I stepped back from it. And then from those remarks, I said, in the civic awards, I saw a tradition that had been lost. Not all traditions should be kept, much less brought back, but we brought back the civic awards in 2018 because it is important to take time to celebrate our community and give recognition where it is deserved, to amplify and tell the story of the people who make a difference in the community. So much of life is ephemeral and impermanent. We pause to remember tonight in hopes that we may never forget. I received an email today from one of the beautiful home award recipients, and it makes that same point. It reads as follows. My wife and I, as recipients of University Heights Good Stewardship Home Award, wish to thank you and your team for the lovely and well-planned awards ceremony at John Carroll University Wednesday night, November 15th, 2023. From the seating, the delicious food and drinks, the talks, the appearance of our state representative, recognition of deserving teachers, the poet laureate, the academic challenge team, the service department workers, the Dollar Bank rep, the excellent chorale harmony, and the Beaumont singer, the evening came together as a tribute to our beloved city. You and Rachel Veda cohesively carried the awards and talks through to a successful conclusion. Thank you for the chocolate bars and for the organization that such an evening required. Some thank yous are in order. Thank you to those who performed at this year's ceremony. The Mal Baron Trio performed during the pre-awards reception. Heights poet laureate Sierra Freeman presented the original poem about University Heights, which I also provided Mrs. Thomas to supplement for the record. The barbershoppers from Heights High sang 3 songs, as did Laura Ravis, the winner of the 2023 Shining Star CLE competition. Thank you to everyone who attended, and thank you to everyone who made this year's event possible, including Rory Hill and his team at JCU, as well as Chloe Celia, Deanna Bremer-Fisher, and Monica. I was going to leave it at that, but I do think there's one thing I want to state for the record having to do with the item absent from tonight's agenda, Chick-fil-A and the Chick-fil-A application. The applicant has requested to go to the Architectural Review Board before going to City Council for consideration on Planning Commission's recommendation. There is no set order in our ordinances requiring an applicant to go to council, then ARB, or to ARB and then to council. Either is appropriate, and the applicant has elected to go to ARB. The next ARB meeting is December 14th, 2023. Our ARB is to give the applicant a full hearing, and the next council meeting after ARB, if they are done at that point in the process, is December 18th, 2023. Thank you. This concludes my report. Next is reports and communications from the City Council and taking of action thereon. Mrs. Wise.
Yes, thank you. I just want to thank all the residents of University Heights that came out and voted for all the issues, amendments, and the City Council that was on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other reports or communications from council members?
From building and housing we met tonight, I'd like to thank Mr. Cheatham for the creation of a flow chart that we think is going to be helpful. It's the first step in getting things organized. We've had complaints from residents looking to know who to go to for what. We'd also like to thank Mr. Engelbrecht, who also was present tonight. We discussed the exterior housing inspections, the new letter on that, and also he has indicated he also started working on a flow chart so that we have something that's very organized that both our residents can see, know where to go, know who to talk to without a lot of back and forth for, am I in the right area? What do I need to apply for these things? So I'd like to thank them both. Very productive meeting.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Weiser. Are there any other reports from council members? Very good. Then we'll turn to reports and communications from the various directors. We'll start with finance. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to give everyone an update on where we stand through the month of October. Our year-to-date revenue in the general fund through October is $15,217,263. That represents 88.3% of the original revenue estimate in the general fund for 2023. For all funds, year-to-date revenue is $18,995,100. That amount is 85.6% of the total revenue estimate for all funds for the year. Just to let everybody know, in November, those numbers were through October. We did receive the check from Cleveland Water Department, about $554,929. Those funds will support the Saybrook Water Main project that is started. So that's good news because that's not coming out of our pocket. For on the expense side, year-to-date expense for the general fund through October, $13,724,117. Year-to-date expense for all funds through October, $17,169,510. So, from both the perspective expenses versus revenue for the general fund and for all funds, we've taken in more money than we've spent through October 31st. Just an update on a couple other things. We have processed all the retro wage payments for the police and fire contracts that were approved earlier by council. We still have to process the retro payments for Local 860 for the service department. With respect to income tax, year-to-date collections as of the end of October, $11,096,649. Last year, collections for the same period through the end of October were $10,963,825. So we're up 0.93% over the same period from last year. And that's all I have.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Questions? I see Mr. Robbins raise his hand.
You mentioned the retro payments. That was included in those values through 1031 then, or those were recently made?
No, those were included.
That was included, okay.
And the provisions in the appropriation amendment tonight is to pay forward. Both those have already happened. The increase in wages that will happen through the end of the year, and then I also put in for the service department contract.
Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Kennedy? Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next is Mr. McConville.
Thank you, Mayor. I will be asking council to consider an executive session at the end of this evening's agenda to provide an update on University Square, as well as an update on a matter of pending litigation. And I will deliver a report to council in executive session.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Any questions for Mr. McConville? Seeing none, we'll move on to public safety, police.
Mayor, no report.
Okay, thank you, Chief Rogers. Public safety, fire. Chief Burko, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. One item to report tonight. Early October, we got a notice from Cleveland Division of Water about doing maintenance on the water tower in Beechwood. We had to suspend hydrant flushing at that time. So we have now been flushing hydrants in the city from October 5th through date today. On the 16th, we received notice that the tower is back up in service. So starting today, we're resuming hydrant flushing. We'll be keeping an eye on the weather so that we don't run into any freezing issues. And this will go into early part of December. So we've had the signs out for quite some time. We'll put some notice back on social media that if they see the signs, we will actually be in the area during that week. And hopefully get this wrapped up in the next couple weeks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief Burko. Any questions for Chief Burko? Very good, thank you, Chief. Service Department, Mr. Pennington.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Pennington. Building Department, Mr. G.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I met, as Wynn mentioned, with the Housing Building Committee for the first time tonight. We covered quite a bit in that. One thing I neglected to mention to them that I did want to bring to Council's attention is I've been looking at your fee schedule, and this is just an FYI, doesn't need any discussion per se, but your fee schedule hasn't really been updated since, many parts of it since 2001. And I did see the mayor and Kelly got to me this afternoon some previous attempts in 2020 to maybe update the fee schedule. And it was shelved probably because of COVID, I imagine, the pandemic at that time. And I did look into it quite a bit, and I would like to at some point talk to council, the committee, whatever the process is, maybe Luke, whomever, about updating your fee schedule. It's woefully out of date. That's hurting the city, and contractors are expecting to pay more. They pay more all around you. But also, in looking at that, there are much easier ways that are more user-friendly to have a fee schedule than kind of the convoluted one that a lot of Cleveland area cities have had for many, many decades. And so I would recommend that if we go forward with that, if you would like me to look into that, that I also change the format to a much simpler format, that the bottom line works the same, but just much easier to use for the customer, the resident, the owner, the contractor, the designer, whoever's going through the permit process. That's my report.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Cheatham. Any questions for Mr. Cheatham? All right, thank you. Housing and Community Development, Mr. Engelbrecht.
Mayor, I have no report.
No report, thank you. City Engineer, Mr. Cheney is excused from meetings, but I do have a written report and I will read it now. Engineer's report, item 1, the Saybrook water line replacement. Construction is completed, working on final paperwork to close out the project. Number 2, the 2023 road program. Construction is completed. The extra work for or at Jesus School on Glendon Road is also completed. Working on final paperwork to close out the project. It's going to be addressed later in the agenda. Item 3 is Silsbee Emergency Water Main Repair. The water main has been replaced, and Cleveland Water Department approved the replacement of the road full depth with a new concrete road. The replacement will be from Milton Road to a point 300 feet west. Work will not start until after the Thanksgiving holiday. Number 4, the East Scarborough Canterbury Sanitary Relief Sewer. A pre-construction meeting was held today. Work will start on November 28th. The road will be closed to through traffic. Work will be completed in 30 days. Mr. Pennington and I, together with Mr. Cheney, did attend that pre-con. That concludes Mr. Cheney's report. Next item is communications and civic engagement. Mr. Cook's been excused from this evening's meeting, but I have a written report. Mayor Brennan, members of council, thank you for excusing my absence this evening so I may attend my son's football banquet. The results are in from the city's survey of residents on our arts and cultural events. Dan Brenner Fisher was successful in securing grant money from the Ohio Arts Council for Fall Fest. As a result, Deanna worked with me and Chloe Celia, as well as former intern Maggie Linder, on a survey. The goal of the survey is to gather feedback from residents to see how we can improve future events and perhaps create additional events. The survey results may also help us earn grant funding in the future. I will send you the results of the survey prior to Thanksgiving, and the results will be shared with the community via a future edition of the Friday e-News. Here's a sneak preview. Residents like our city events, from the Memorial Day Parade to the Civic Awards. They offered helpful suggestions like inviting even more musicians to march in the parade, to specific recommendations of genres for bands at the summer concert series. Residents also had ideas for new city events, the most popular being a farmer's market at Walter Stinson Community Park. Thank you, happy Thanksgiving, and be looking for survey information in your email by Wednesday afternoon. Mrs. Sachs?
Thank you. How was that survey disseminated? Who received that?
That was sent through the e-news.
How many households received the e-news?
I
The
believe,
weekly wrap-up?
yeah, I believe there were 1,500 email addresses on that list. Approximately. I'd have to go back and look. It's been a while since I looked at the MailChimp list myself, but it is well over 1,000, but I don't think it's quite 2,000. If it turns out to be a different number, we'll let you know. Any other questions? Thank you. We will then move to economic development. Mrs. Drucker.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just want to remind everyone, ZoneCo is having, we are having our next meeting with ZoneCo on November 29th. That meeting will be held here from 6 to 8, and the main issue of that discussion is about parking throughout the city. And that's all I have tonight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Drucker. Any questions for Mrs. Drucker? All right, thank you. We will turn now then to item 9, reading and disposition of ordinances, resolutions, motions, and consideration of agenda items. First item is item A motion to enter executive session for personnel matters. I believe I've received communication that we may not need to do that, and that we will proceed immediately to item B. Ordinance 2023-62, establishing salary range and pay rate range for non-bargaining unit employees and declaring an emergency. This is on second reading. I think the only changes that have been made to this, the ordinance, 2 of the base pay range rates have been changed. The clerk of council's base rate now tops out at, I believe, $87,500. My packet does reflect that, so I think that's already made the packet. And then for the service department director, the base pay range and rate now tops out at $110,000. Both these numbers were previously lower, and it was suggested that they be increased similar to similar positions here. So I think that covers the changes. Is there any discussion or questions? I'll start with Mrs. Marks.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I want to thank the HR rep for making those changes. I actually had a conversation with him and Mr. Kennedy just to clarify what was talked about in the council meeting. I also want to thank Mr. Kennedy. I don't know if it's Mr. Kennedy or Roger who put in the old, the last ordinance, the last 2 ordinances actually, so we can see the difference, and especially with most of the council besides Mr. Rock. They probably have never seen this before, so that was extremely helpful, I think, just for council in general. I do want to note that the job descriptions were drafted, again, much, much better. I personally have a few questions still to discuss. I'm not sure if anyone else does, but I'll just start off with a couple of things, and then I can give the floor to some other people. So we just have to make sure that all of the job descriptions, the date adopted is changed to when the ordinance actually gets signed, because right now it says April. I think that was when they were originally submitted to council for review. So for the finance director, I think where it comes to knowledge, skills, and abilities, obviously everybody can get trained in a software, but to specifically state VIP, that's the correct name of the accounting software, Mr. Kennedy?
It's software solutions.
Okay, or software. So I think we should specifically add that. That would help. Again, it's not a requirement, but they should have knowledge, if they can, in that software. Another couple things that I had a question on is just the executive assistant to the mayor and special projects. I understand, and I'm not debating that this is the mayor's assistant. I just feel that this job description has some pieces where I think it's overkill, it's overdone. I just wanted to get a sense of what the mayor and council feels on this. High-level budgeting oversight, strategic planning and decision-making, interviewing candidates, recommends hire of employee candidates, evaluates performance. That's way over an executive assistant. I don't think that those should be in there. I wanted to hear some feedback from the mayor and council.
She does all those things, and therefore they are in her job description.
So you would let her hire somebody?
I've let her be involved in hiring processes. And she's made hiring recommendations.
I have a little bit of a problem with that. I would depend on whoever the mayor is to do that. I'm not sure that an assistant should have such authority. I'm not sure what anybody else thinks.
Thank you. Ms. Watson.
In reading through that particular job description, some of what's in there actually be more appropriate for an individual like Shaker Heights has, where it's a city administrator who has those tasks. I don't think that that's necessarily inappropriate. I think I talked about that years ago, Mayor, as you well know, that maybe we did need that, but I would see that as a position that council would create, and that there would be a formal hiring and approval by council of that person. And maybe this might be a good thing to look at and to pull out those items and then really begin discussing the potential to hire a city administrator for the city that can work under the mayor, and with the mayor appointing, but with council approving that appointment, in order that we don't run into some of the issues that we've seen in some of the departments over the years. It's obvious that the position of mayor now has grown beyond what was a part-time mayor in the city. The heavy involvement now for the mayor in the WACA and at the county takes a chunk of the mayor's time away from the city. But I don't know if the description of a special assistance coordinator should have those specific job duties. I think it needs clarity. I think what I'm seeing here points out that you are actually showing us that we do need to start considering that for the city of University Heights. And I would be hesitant to approve this particular job description and then turn around to that individual and say, hey, we've got to take this away from you at a later point. I think we really need to look at that in that regard.
Thank you. I'm not asking you to approve the job description. These have been accepted administratively. These are the positions that we have, and these are the descriptions that we've created for them administratively. What we're on today is the salary bands themselves.
If some of that gets resolved and it goes into that, then that salary range might actually have to change. If those types of activities that actually belong not to someone just it's a special projects coordinator, but it actually is a city administrator with extended duties. Obviously, that may cause some tweaking for your administrative assistant, because they're obviously carrying additional duties far beyond what a normal administrative assistant would.
Well, I think some clarification is needed. I do not have an administrative assistant. I have an executive assistant to the mayor on special projects, and she has certain administrative duties that I've assigned to her. As you've correctly pointed out, we do not have a city administrator. And Deanna Bremer Fisher's experience and her and the overall assistance that she provides me and the rest of the administration is invaluable. And but we have attempted to quantify within the job description what exactly she brings to the position. You know, I'm a little uncomfortable bringing up a specific person by name here out on, on the public record. But Deanna's been exemplary, comes with experience, having been the executive director of a CDC, among other things. The things that are described on the job description that she holds are things that she is actually doing. These aren't hypothetical. These are assignments that I have made and she has accepted and are part of her overall job description.
I understand that fully. I'm pointing out, though, that perhaps you and I have a disagreement as to what would belong to a city administrator versus a special projects coordinator.
She's not a coordinator.
Well, a special projects assistant to the mayor on special projects. And I do believe we can have that disagreement, but I think it does point out that if we have an assistant to the mayor on special projects who now is taking on those roles, that perhaps council needs to looking into adding into the administrative code that city administrator, and that some of these job duties may actually belong more appropriately there. That's all.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Is there any other? Mrs. Wells.
Thank you. I just wanted a point of clarification from the law director. So we had an audit finding that we needed our salary range ordinance updated, and it also stated job descriptions, correct?
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
So that's under the purview of city council. I mean, a job description literally ties into the budget, so it's part of this agenda item. I mean, I would like, I'm so happy to have a discussion if the mayor feels that these are things that, the assistant is doing. Okay, I just wanted to bring it up. It's unusual for an assistant to be doing some of those things. But it is, I just want to clarify, are the job descriptions can council update job descriptions also, since it was an audit finding?
Well, it wasn't an audit finding, it was in the management letter.
That's an audit finding.
Mr. Kennedy, could you clarify that?
It was a recommendation in the management letter for this year, with the understanding that since it's been an ongoing recommendation, if it's not addressed this year, it will be a citation next year, or for this current period.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Liz, I think you had something.
Well, I think this way, at least it's a part of the question. The job descriptions are not formally incorporated by reference into the legislation. So the salary band ordinance is a piece of legislation that is in effect separate and apart from the job descriptions themselves. The job descriptions as they're presented to you today are administrative job descriptions. I don't know that there's anything council can do particularly other than make suggestions on that. However, you can, as was alluded to by Ms. Weiser, you can update portions of your code to create positions or eliminate them. And in doing so, you could fashion duties.
Thank you, Ms. Class.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you. the salary ranges look better. I appreciate the little that's gone into that. I do have a couple of questions about the wording in the job descriptions. Mr. Zalesnik pointed out to me when I was concerned about the council chambers and having OSHA standards upheld and complied with, that OSHA does not apply to local and state governments. And yet OSHA is mentioned, again, I pointed this out the first time, throughout almost all of these job descriptions. So that is incorrect. I'm surprised he still has that in there and that the mayor signed off on that. So that's number one, that needs to be corrected. Number two, I brought up about collective bargaining, and while there is some reference to labor relations in the service director position and the police director position, it is only mentioned more definitively in the fire director's position. So I would hope that there would be real clarity that the three positions that have collective bargaining negotiations and really have to understand all the things associated with it would have more definitive wording and actually identical wording because that's I think pretty important when hiring somebody and making sure we are not exposing the city and putting ourselves at risk for all kinds of things, whether it's litigation or workers' comp or whatever. And also, just a minor thing, it says the service director position is vacant, and we know that's not true, so that needs to be updated. And I'm not sure, Ms. Thomas, do you need to use the typewriter? There might be some documents that you need to use a typewriter for. Okay. Good. Okay, so it's in there for you. Okay, I'm glad. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Sachs. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Rock.
The question is, I had asked about this previously, about putting the original wage range in. So is the original what's crossed out then? Or was that just an edit for today? For instance, chief of police, there's a range, upper range is crossed out. So was the upper range that's crossed out the previous range? And then in bold, this would be the legislation.
Are you looking at 2019-75?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's just simply how that appears in the legislation. That's the prior ordinance. That's the reference that was.
So my question is that the, okay, so if that's the prior ordinance, that's the prior range then, which is what I was seeking. So that's what that is then, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
What page is that? I know it's there.
The big packet is page 3. But,
3.
on the ordinance.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Oh, it was ordinance 1975, which is the prior ordinance. I'm sorry, you know what? If that's ordinance 1975 and it has crossouts, are we approving it as, we should be approving this as 2362?
2019. That's information.
That's just information.
Yeah, it's there just as a point of reference. That's not the ordinance.
I see. Okay, so now you have, okay, the next page is ordinance 21-blank. And then you have the salary ordinance table on page 7.
Yeah, the packet's out of order. The table is the exhibit A to the ordinance 2023-16.
Okay, so that's what's missing then, the original base pay range / rate. I guess if I'm going to vote on this, I want to know what the original rate is and what's the new rate.
Well, the original,
side by side, instead of having to go to different pages.
The original rates are on these two prior ordinances included in the packet.
But they're different, so I don't know what's accurate, and there seems to be additional roles, classification codes on the new chart that are not reflected on the old chart, which would be in the ordinance.
Yeah, Mrs. Thomas, in the packet, 2019-75 and 2021, it's not numbered, but these two ordinances that are in the packet for reference, are those true and accurate copies from the clerk of council's office with regard to prior?
I believe those were forwarded to me.
I'm sorry?
I believe those were forwarded to me to add to the package.
Okay. Who forwarded them to you? Did Mr. Zalesnik or Mr. McConnell?
Probably came from me, Mayor.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yeah, and then, you know, with regard to the exhibit that is attached to, or is Exhibit A to 2023-62, the additional positions are, it's intended to be comprehensive. You know, these previous ordinances did not include all the positions. It tends to include the top of department type positions. Here we have a comprehensive salary ordinance schedule for the non-bargaining staff. All the non-bargaining positions are listed here. So we've given you a more complete salary ordinance schedule than was contemplated in the previous two ordinances.
I understand, but I asked specifically that this chart that we received in executive session, which I'm now saying on the floor, that I see the original number and the new number side by side. And I guess I can go back and forth, but since this classification code has probably a dozen or more positions that are not listed on the other, I can't refer back on all of the positions. So I don't know how much things increased by. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, it does to a point. When it comes to the positions that weren't listed in the previous ordinances, they weren't there. So I can't show you, we can't show you the bands that were there because they weren't part of these ordinances. What we have are people in these positions that are making a certain amount of money, and as Mr. Zalesnik explained at the last meeting, this salary ordinance schedule as proposed is a memorialization essentially of what we are currently doing, and goes ahead and establishes that formally to satisfy an audit requirement. So we don't have previous ordinances on these points because they simply weren't included, and we don't have existing established bans on these. There were some provisional ones that had been written up by the administration. Susan Drucker and I worked on those some time ago, and that was part of part of the strategic planning discussions. But those were never formally adopted by council. They were looked at in committee and I think generally favorably received, as I remember it, but it was never actually then formally adopted. So, you know, I guess I didn't realize, and I don't know if anybody else realized, that you literally wanted items on the same page.
It would be helpful because, yeah, it would be helpful. Okay. Right?
Face value, just a couple of.
Yes, Ms. Weiser's been waiting patiently. I want to call on her. So,
thank you. Just to remind you, Councilman Ron, the pay range, the current pay range is midpoints. These were midpoints, these are just ranges. And if I remember correctly, the discussion actually was, over time, we've actually added positions that I know from budget hearings that those positions have been mentioned and might be assisted, the finance, in the finance office, the deputy finance director. I remember hearing those things at various points, not even having been on this council. And I think this just got it in because it's much more comprehensive. And I slightly disagree with the mayor. I think it's important to pass this tonight. My disagreement with the mayor is that a management letter is not an audit finding. It comes out of the audit and the auditors say, hey, correct this or else. And I've seen that boomerang for a lot of cities that I looked at, not ours. You're okay for right now. Said lovingly. Those kinds of things, though, I think are important. And for me personally, yes, this was out of order, but when I stopped and I looked at it, I realized they had given us back information, which I greatly appreciated with the 2019 and the 2021 ordinances, and then now with this.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps, but.
And I guess, could I request for next time we approve this, which would be in 1 year or 2 years? Could we do this every year? It's in 2 years.
I think it's 2 years.
2 years. So for in 2 years, and then I'll remind you, and then just do two columns. So the 2023 amount and then the 2025 amount. And I go them side by side and make a decision.
Okay, I think that would be helpful. All right, thank you. Okay, I'll go with Ms. Marshall.
I just wanted to know, so when I'm looking at the 2021 and the 2019 75, and the annual compensation is itemized on here, is that going to be the same way on the new ordinance? These numbers that we have on this chart, are they going to appear on this ordinance the way they appear on the other two ordinances?
No, they're going to appear as an exhibit. So when the ordinance is signed and recorded, presuming you pass it, it will go into the books as it appears here as number 62, and then the exhibit is this sheet here, which says on the top City of University salary ordinance, has the Excel spreadsheet front and back. And Mrs. Thomas does that journalization, but I believe I've accurately stated how you do that.
Okay, so it'll just be, okay, like that.
Right. Okay. This is one.
Yes, thank you. So I would like to make a motion to pass this with the caveat that the mayor takes into consideration the updates, a couple that Mrs. Sachs and I mentioned about OSHA, the data adapted, software solutions for the finance department and the collective bargaining for police and service. I think those are important. I don't think the mayor would disagree on those couple of things, but besides that, I would make a motion to approve this.
Okay, on emergency.
On emergency.
Okay, thank you.
Question. Are
Yes,
the job descriptions a part of this ordinance?
No, they were included for reference.
They are not.
At the request of
Thank
council.
you. Thank you. Yes.
Second the motion on emergency.
All right, so we have a motion to pass on emergency with some recommendations, which the mayor will consider by Mrs. Weiss, and then we have a second on emergency by Mr. Brock. Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you. So the mayor will consider the changes. Is there a time limit? 30 days, 60 days, 90 days?
That's not part of the motion.
You know, the motion causes me a little heartburn. Because I think that, the ordinance is standalone. The ordinance stands on its own as it relates to the job descriptions. They're not contingent on one another. So I think that it makes sense to me that you as a legislative body would have discussion with the mayor that would occur out in the open during this meeting about whether he's willing to update the job descriptions in connection with the suggestions that you made, and to flesh that out a little bit and have it be reflected in the minutes. And perhaps, and I don't want to speak for the mayor, but perhaps the mayor is willing to agree to that, and will recirculate some job descriptions that are updated based on your discussion. The motion itself on the ordinance is a motion that's up or down on this ordinance, and the the job descriptions are not part of the ordinance. So that's why the motion is a little confusing, and I don't think, frankly, it would bind the mayor in any way. So I don't know if that's sufficient to make the point. It's just that the two are not.
Well, I'll try to make this a little easier if I may. But, I'm more than happy to consider and likely update. I'll talk to Mr. Zalesnik about the items regarding how we identify the software package of the finance director, software solutions versus VIP. I already wrote that down, as well as the items Mrs. Sachs identified, the references to OSHA, and reviewing what we've written here as it pertains to collective bargaining, and if it needs some additions. And I like the idea of also making it consistent between the three department heads who participate in collective bargaining negotiations, that the language would, for clarity's sake, be identical, because having sat on the negotiations team or been a part of the negotiations team at one time or another for all of the for police, fire, and service, the roles are essentially the same. It isn't like the police chief does it one way and the fire department does it a little different, or the service department does it a little differently. The role of the department head is the same across the board. So I'm happy to say, as I've just said on the record, that I'll sit down with Mr. Zalesnik and review those items and make the appropriate changes. But to Mr. McConnell's point, it sounds like we should amend the motion and just have a clean up down and vote on emergency on ordinance 2023-62, and would ask Mrs. Weiss if she would so amend her motion.
Yes, I'll amend my motion to approve the salary ranges.
On
emergency.
Okay, very good, thank you. Mr. Rock, you still second?
I still second the amendment.
Okay, very good. Any further discussion? And you're satisfied? I am. Thanks. Okay, so any further discussion on the motion? Mrs. Thomas will take 2 votes. Actually, 1 vote, because this is, we've heard this before, and the changes were relatively minor, I think. Correct. Okay, very good. All right, so this is on emergency, 1 vote on 2023-62. You may call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall? Aye. Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Okay, very good, motion carries. Next is ordinance 2023-66, enacting codified ordinance chapter 216 entitled Prohibited Campaign Contributions, declaring an emergency. This is on second reading. Sponsor is Mrs. Weiss. Good floor.
Yes, thank you. We had a very robust discussion about this at the last council meeting. Just for a very quick overview, this is more or less a self-monitoring ordinance that will create a review board if anybody feels that there has been some impropriety. We went through this really in depth with the various types of elected officials who can contribute, and how the review board is created, and the members that make it up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on this item? If not, is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion, and it does say declaring an emergency, do you?
No.
Okay, so motion on emergency?
Yes. Emergency.
Okay, motion to approve emergency by Mrs. Sachs. Is there a second?
Steps.
Okay, second by Mrs. Weiss. Any discussion? Again, this is on second reading, so there will only be 1 vote. Mrs. Thomas, you call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Next is item D, ordinance 2023-68, amending ordinances 2022-69, authorizing permanent appropriations, current and other expenditures of the City of University Heights, Ohio, for the period commencing January 1, 2023 and ending December 31st, 2023, declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the budget amendment that we talked about for the last several meetings. This is necessary for a couple of primary reasons. One is to provide the increase in appropriations for the 4% wage increase applicable to all the unions, all of which have been approved so far by council. And I did also put in there a 4% salary increase for all non-union administrative personnel. The salary increases that are proposed in this amendment shall be applied retroactively back to July 1st. I need to correct something. Mr. Rock's question, we did process the police payments in October. We didn't do fire payments until the first week of November. So police was included in that number that I gave you. Fire was not. We still have yet to do the service sheet. The other major component was the increases associated with the vehicle purchases that were approved by council for the safety forces that came out of the last meeting. So the total amount of the increase in the budget here is $1,303,207. It's important to note the way government accounting works. We have to budget the increase for the vehicles, both as a transfer out of the general fund and then as an expenditure in the capital fund. So it's basically counted amongst that 1.3 million twice. Of the 1.3 million, 743,635 is allocated to increases in the general fund. 559,572 is distributed amongst increases in other funds. So of the $970,000 is associated with the extra money that we need, the extra appropriation that we need to pay for the vehicles this year that were pushed up from a potential of waiting to next year. So again, that number is counted twice in that process because it comes out of the general fund as a transfer. The capital fund needs money. It right now is only funded by 5% of income tax collections every year, and that basically covers the day-to-day routine things that we purchase out of the capital fund. So we have to transfer some of the general fund monies into the capital fund. So of those totals, the remaining $333,207, that's what you get when you take $970,000 off the $1,000,003. That is being appropriated to support the salary increases that I just spoke of. It's important to know that a couple things, they go back to July 1st. From here on in, from whenever the retros are processed, they're at higher rates. And we also have contributing rates that we have to fund for pension, police and fire pension, OPERS, and overtime expense that was paid was already incurred, so we have to go back and pay for it at a higher rate. Those were all estimated at the beginning of the year. We also have some minor payments that we'll have to do for Medicare tax and that sort of thing based on the additional monies we're expending. I went through and I made some other small changes to a number of other lines. Everything was pretty nominal outside of those two major areas being the salary increases in the vehicles. I did that with hopes that we don't have to have a year-end ordinance. I won't know that until after we cut off purchasing, which we're going to do this year, December 6th. So it'll give me enough time for the meeting on the 18th to see if we need any kind of last-minute appropriation adjustments, just to make sure everything's in line for both the county and the auditors. So that's basically what the detail here consists of.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Are there any questions for Mr. Kennedy? And if not, is there a motion to approve auditor consent?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Weiser. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mayor.
Second by Mr. King. Is there any discussion? We'll take two votes. The first is on the suspension of rules. Mrs. Thomas?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks? Aye. Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall? Aye. Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
And then on the main motion.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks? Aye. Mrs. Wise? Aye. Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall? Aye. Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item E was tabled, so we move now to item F, a motion to approve the 2023 road program change order number 3 for the installation of sidewalk on Glendon Road where the CHUH mobile unit was located for an amount not to exceed $16,968.75. Mr. Bennington.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. City Council, when we discussed change order number 2 for the city's road repair program, requested we install sidewalk on Glendon Road where the Cleveland Heights University Heights mobile unit was removed. GPD met with the contractor and measured 255 feet of sidewalk fencing on the east side of Glendon Road, which was in excess of 130 feet where the mobile unit was. Work also required the removal of 3 trees. Contractor submitted a bid, or quote, of $16,968.75. The quote was reviewed and deemed reasonable, and at this time the work went forward due to weather considerations. We're asking for approval tonight.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Pennington. Any questions for Mr. Pennington? If not, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Motion to approve change order by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Marshall. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
A very good motion carries. Next is item G, a motion authorizing to advertise seeking bids for the 2023-2 fall tree pruning program. Mr. Pennington.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This year, as part of our annual tree maintenance program on public properties, we are requesting authorization to advertise and bid the 2023-2024 tree pruning and removal contract. This year's program addresses tree pruning in the southwest quadrant of the city where most of the summer storm damage occurred. This was a switch from the original plan to do the northeast quadrant of the city, which we now do in 2024. A list of the locations for pruning and removal have been included in the packet, and there are approximately 66 trees for removal and 313 trees for pruning at an estimated cost of approximately $160,000, with work to be completed by April of 2024. Funds are available in the Shade Tree Maintenance Fund, and at this time we ask for approval for the bid process.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Pennington. Any questions for Mr. Pennington? If not, is there a motion to authorize seeking bids?
So
Motion by Ms. Marshall. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Weiser. Any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
A very good motion carries. Thank you. Next is item H, a motion to enter executive session for the purpose of discussing legal proceedings, personnel, and real estate matters. As reflected by Mr. McConville during his report, he has a report to give an executive session on University Square, I think he said. University Square as litigation, pending litigation. So is there a motion to enter that executive session after the point where we do, I mean, that's funny. I guess we do it after the committee reports, but then before item 10. So moved. I'll take the motion from Mr. King. And second? Second by Mrs. Weiss. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall? Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Okay, we will now turn to reports of standing committees and taking action thereon. Building housing, Ms. Weiser.
Already been at the beginning of the meeting?
Yes. Very good, we'll reference that. Very good. Community outreach, Mr. King.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. Economic development, Mr. Ron.
Yes, Mayor, just to repeat, there's an economic development meeting on the 29th to discuss the zoning, as the instructor had outlined in her report.
Very good, thank you. Finance, Mrs. Weiss.
Yes, there will be a finance meeting mid-December. We're just finalizing the date.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Recreation, Mr. Cooney. Mr. Cooney's not here. He's been excused. I know there is a rec meeting scheduled, I think, was it December 12th? On December 12th. So we will be having a rec meeting that evening. Does anybody else from the committee have a further report? Okay, very good. Safety, Ms. Marshall.
yes, Mayor. We're going to be having a meeting, a safety meeting on December 4th, and we're going to be discussing the parking situation, and JCU is supposed to be in attendance as well.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Service and Utilities, Mrs. Sanders.
Thank you. The next Service and Utilities Committee meeting will be December 5th, and the agenda will be developed in the next week. I would like to ask Mr. Pennington or the mayor regarding the SES visit, how that went, and when we can expect a report.
We're having a conference call with SCS after Thanksgiving to get the status of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee of the Whole, Mrs. Morris.
Yes, sir. Committee of the Whole meeting also on December 12th at 6 p.m.
Very good. Thank you. We will then go to executive session. At this time, I do not anticipate further business on either 10 or 11. I'm not aware of any, and I don't anticipate anything taken on the record following our executive session other than a motion to adjourn. You are nevertheless welcome to stay for the duration if you so choose. If you are not here when we get out, thank you for being here and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, just 4.